now recognize Mr. Magaziner for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And I want to thank Congressman Pfluger for introducing the bill. Let me just start by saying intellectual property theft by the CCP is a real problem. Espionage by the CCP is a real problem. It's frankly been eye-opening to me since I got here to Congress as I've learned the extent to which the CCP is determined to steal intellectual property from U.S. companies, to spy on U.S. critical infrastructure. I had a general sense that countries spy on each other all the time, but what the CCP is doing in the United States is above and beyond international norms. And that is why it is important that we take measures to protect U.S. companies, U.S. research, U.S. military capability from the CCP as they seek to undermine our military advantage, undermine U.S. companies' competitiveness, and steal jobs, which is another aspect of this as well, right? Because a lot of the IP theft is to help Chinese companies produce knockoff products. That means fewer jobs and less manufacturing here in the United States. All of that being said, I do have some questions here because as I understand it, this bill is quite a bit different from the version that passed the committee in the 117th. That version, as I understood it, had the same definition for a Chinese entity of concern, but was not an automatic restriction on funding for entities of concern. There was a reporting requirement, and there was also the ability for DHS to offer waivers. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, the version that passed last year had a DHS funding ban specifically for Confucius institutes, but not necessarily for entities of concern, which is a broader category. Is that correct?
If you yield.
Gentleman's recognized.
Yeah, and again, this is really fundamental to the argument, is that at the point in time where I offered this bill with no waiver ability last year, we couldn't even get it to the floor. And so the threat landscape having changed, I think one of the most important things right now is that we look at the intent, as you mentioned, and they do have the intent to steal, to surveil, to conduct espionage. And when you look at what a GAO report that talks about a number of schools in 2019, the number of CIs has dropped, from 100 to 5 in 74 of those instances. The removal of DoD funding through the NDAA bill was cited as a reason.
And I'm sorry, I got to reclaim just because I just want to understand the facts. So the definition of an entity of concern is fairly broad. It includes, for example, the Chinese State Administration for Science, Technology, and Industry for the National Defense. So any Chinese university that had a relationship with that state agency, the university would be an entity of concern. As I was looking at, all right, what is the Chinese State Administration for Science, Technology, and Industry? It's primarily a defense-oriented agency, but it also covers their version of NASA, essentially, the National Space Administration for China. And so, for example, I know the United States has entered into an agreement with China and a number of other nations around sharing non-military research related to space. Would a university that was doing that type of research in China and a university that was doing space-related research in the U.S. not be able to receive funding under this bill, even if there's no military application necessarily, and even if we already have an agreement between our two nations to allow that kind of collaboration to occur?
Yeah, again, if you yield for a second, the question is on, and we had no disagreement on the definition of entity of concern last Congress. So what has changed this Congress? So if that same entity of concern,
yeah, well,
the
difference is that in the bill last year, entities of concern were not automatically barred from all funding, right? Confucius institutes were, entities of concern were not. And so I think the fundamental question for me, and I know I'm low on time, is is the definition of entities of concern so broad that we may accidentally be including things that we don't mean to include? And, I want to get to the bottom of this and try to have my concerns satisfied, so if someone else will yield, I'd be interested in continuing the conversation.
The gentleman yields.